Two topics today. Why do we need all these Batman movies? And the Sam Elliott controversy. Honestly, after listening to the podcast, I'm going to say it's a bit of a hoax. You know, we go from Michael Keaton, we go to Val Kilmer, we go to George Clooney, we go to Christian Bale. I think with Christian Bale, you really reached, particularly with The Dark Knight, a massive cultural moment in terms of everyone saying this is not only the definitive this is not only the definitive Batman movie, this is kind of the definitive superhero movie. If something is going to, if a superhero movie is going to push beyond the genre and be seen as something that, and this is why I think the Oscars are important, be seen as something that deserves recognition of, like movies like No Country for Old Men, Saving Private Ryan, Lord of the Rings, then I think The Dark Knight was the closest movie to ever do that. And I think that it's because Batman lends itself to certain type of storytelling that other superheroes don't really lend themselves to. And so pretty much the question is, why is it that we are so accustomed to getting different actors to play Batman, getting new Batman stories so close to other very successful renditions of Batman? Because I think we think about it in a different way than we do other superhero movies, other movies where we have a character where a story resets. Because I honestly, I was 12 whenever The Dark Knight came out, and I remember being very surprised after The Dark Knight Returns coming out, that they were so quickly ready to get Ben Affleck in the saddle to play Batman, which seemed a little bit strange to me. And then whenever we got news that Robert Pattinson was going to be playing Batman, I think that was whenever I kind of got in the mindset of, okay, Batman is really just here to stay. We're just gonna with the Batman character. There's going to be another Batman trilogy from the Robert Pattinson movie, it seems. And from there, we're probably just going to get Batman's, it'll always be different renditions of the character. So I think it's two things. And I think the first one is that I think that audiences really crave nuance whenever it comes to storytelling, particularly whenever it comes to blockbuster storytelling. I think there is a thought among elites in particularly writers in the industry that very much look down on blockbusters, and it makes sense why, because blockbusters really like to lend themselves to the glorious, the huge, the massive, and that means that when you get things like Jurassic Park or Transformers, it becomes very easy to just churn these out on a conveyor belt, and you lose the ambiguity that you really want from any good story, whether it be movies, whether it be books, whether it be theater. And I think that with Batman, because he is famously a much more depressed character, the loss that he's gone through, the fact that he's very much a loner, the gothic setting of Gotham, I think the story has to lend itself to a level of nuance. The main character has to doubt whether or not they are even a good guy. The main character has to constantly feel as if they might not even be good guys and bad guys. They may very well just be someone who is pushing towards what they think is the greater good, and you really hope to God that by the end of the day you end up producing the greater good, because if not, you've left a whole bunch of collateral damage behind you. The villains tend to lend themselves to more of a populist feeling, meaning that they normally have a point. The Joker, Penguin, even the stupid ones like Poison Ivy and Arnold Schwarzenegger's character didn't really have a point. Even Catwoman, like these Catwoman isn't really a villain, but these villains have a real point in the destruction that they're bringing, which is something that all of these stories, again, James Bond, Superman, all of these villains need to have a point in order for the story to really be good. But I think Batman, because Batman, the character, is so conflicted about what it actually means for him to be good in all renditions of the story, that means it is even more essential in any Batman story for the villain to have a real good point in terms of why they are causing so much destruction that brings out Batman's dilemma in terms of why it is that he's doing what he's doing and whether or not it's actually correct. And all of that, because Batman is such a doubtful character when it comes to trusting in what he is actually doing, and because that's always bouncing off of very, very strong villains. You need strong villains to actually activate that in Batman. I think everyone has a trust, and everyone working on a Batman movie has to bake all of these elements into a cake, and this is all essentially mystery. This all lends itself to mystery and nuance, which you need in order to have a really good story, and blockbusters tend to lend themselves to throwing nuance out the window. So I think I think we get so many renditions of Batman because Batman has to be doubtful, which means he's forced to bring nuance to a story, which means that it's going to connect with an audience because audiences absolutely love that. That is the thing, that's the foundation, I think, of great stories is mystery. And not a lot of other blockbusters do that. That's why I don't think it's the same with something like Superman. I think that is why it's not the same with something like James Bond, which are either much more episodic or just much more light in terms of why are we here? Why are we doing what we're doing? And then I think I think that's the base level. And I actually feel like comparing Batman to the Oscars, I think you could, because Batman in a lot of ways, I think, follows what the Oscars actually do. The Oscars purport to be about awarding things that are the best of the year, which is ridiculous. I think what the Oscars actually end up doing is giving awards to movies that, looking back, fit what the cultural climate was at the time. And I think Batman very much does that same type of thing. Looking back at the Val Kilmers, the Christian Bales, the Michael Keatons, you can see that the era of whatever is going on in the time, whether you want to call it the decade, whether you want to call it, turn of the century or whatever, it's very much reflected in the way that they're telling the Batman story. And I think that's another reason why it's important to continue for Batman to live on, because this is the story that's been set. And for right now, it does a very good job of attracting filmmakers that want to push further and further and further into reflecting how society is seen today whenever it's being made, and also giving the audience what they really, really want is the nuance of understanding, look, not everything is good and not everything is bad. To some degree, the more that you push through life, you're going to realize that there is a huge blur between those two sides. Again, blockbusters are, I think, until we can make movies a lot less expensive to produce, they are the cream of the crop whenever it comes to storytelling to a gigantic audience. And Batman does a great job of writing that middle line of good storytelling and being very, very exciting. So I'm very excited for this new Batman. I'm actually going to be seeing it later today, so we'll see how that turns out, and there will definitely be a review coming up later on. Okay, now moving on to the Sam Elliott story. This story has pissed me off so much. Sam Elliott, incredible actor. I first saw him in The Big Lebowski, and I think he is now most known for the voice of all of those truck commercials and the playing Bradley Cooper's brother in A Star Is Born. Really, really good actor, known for playing, he's either in biker gangs or he's a cowboy. Mainly he's playing a cowboy. So he was on Mark Maron's podcast, WTF, and so I listened to the whole podcast in preparation of this. You've probably seen it online. It's been trending that Sam Elliott has been saying very, very homophobic things in relation to his opinions on Jane Campion's new movie, The Power of the Dog, which is nominated for a ton of awards, has a very high chance of winning the Best Picture for the Oscars, high chance of winning Best Director as well. And I won't say much of what the story is about or what happens. So this movie came up in The Interview, and Sam Elliott was asked what his thoughts were on Power of the Dog. He said that he thought it was shit. So if you don't listen to the whole interview, what you have seen online is a lot of clips where the articles say in the headlines, Sam Elliott says allusions to homosexuality in Power of the Dog are, and then it'll be out of quotes, ... then in quotes, bullshit. And then you get these articles from IndieWire saying things like, Sam Elliott proves that the Power of the Dog has bite in its themes, and a bunch of other places saying, there's clearly still bigotry in Hollywood that needs to be weeded out later. There were some people that are like writing articles like, we can't wait for this part of Hollywood to die out. So first of all, this is all bullshit, and I think this is very sad. Sam Elliott is a very, very good actor. And and I wouldn't even say it. These types of stories are so annoying because it feels like you're having to fight two battles. There's the battle of what the perception is on social media and with all these articles, and then there's the actual content. And if you listen to the actual content, this type of thing happens all the time. You actually realize that the translation of what you actually hear to what the actual interpretation is that everyone is reading that's fueling the outrage is not the same thing in the slightest. So first of all, in the actual interview, Sam Elliott talks about how he loves Texas, but he hates the politics from Texas. He talks about how, looking back on his life, he wishes that he could have actually been at some of the civil rights marches that he was seeing on TV decades ago, and that he absolutely loved what was being stood for back in the day and wishes that he could have been there. And it is one of the last things they talk about. They talk about Power of the Dog. And throughout the whole thing, Sam Elliott is being asked, you have worked in Westerns. What is your perspective on this genre? And so it's someone who's worked in a field for a very long time talking about their experience of working in that field. And so he goes on to even say things like he's not a fan of John Wayne movies, and then he goes on to kind of say, it's more of like a cult of personality about John Wayne. It doesn't really represent the idea of what a Western really is. And so then whenever it gets to the point about talking about Power of the Dog, what he says, and this is actually, maybe before I get into what he says, I've actually talked about this on the channel before with, actually I talked about it with Don't Look Up and The Matrix Resurrections. So in order to really get into talking and discussing a movie, a good movie, I would say if there's a good movie, you're going to talk about it, you really want to talk about it. And there's I call it the hierarchy of giving a shit. So at the top of it, you have, the surface. There's just the watching the movie, experiencing the movie, and then below that, you have the culture. If the story's really good, then you will end up talking about the culture of it. And if you feel like that really connects with what's going on in this day and age, or going on at the time that it was made, or has something to say even more universally than that, then you're definitely going to have a conversation. And the best movies are the ones that get you to the third degree of giving a shit, which is, what is the movie really about? It has universal themes. The things that I think, the movies that you love, the movies that anyone loves that's in their top three, I think does that. The surface is great. If the surface isn't good, then you're not going to interact with the other levels. If the culture isn't good, you're not going to interact with whatever universal themes might be there. I think all movies have that. Even shitty Z movies have that. But because the story is so bad, there's no reason to engage with everything below that. Effectively, what Sam Elliott, someone who's been in the Western genre for years and years and years, says in the interview is, the costumes, the way that the ranchers behaved, the way that there are no families around in any way at all, the way that there's like one woman here and you've got like 25 men is in no way the way anything would have been. He mentions how the landscape doesn't look anything like the landscape where it is set. He then goes on particularly to talk about Benedict Cumberbatch's way of wearing only two different types of, I believe they were chaps, and the way that normally you would have multiple kinds, but that he actually wears them inside the house, and then he will actually go upstairs and sleep in these, and this is the only clothing that he wears. Essentially what he's saying is there's certain technical things that happened in this time, that happen in this genre, that happen in these kind of stories that is not about the deeper cultural level, but it's just the surface level of, you got to get some things right. If you're watching like a new drama, and the character is going to someone's house for dinner and they just walk in and they're like a guest, that's going to register as, why did he do that? That was a little bit weird. You know those points in movies where something happens and it just seems a little bit off, so you just kind of smirk about it? Like, it happens a lot when you watch movies from the 20s, where back then, culturally, one person does something that's a little weird, so you laugh at it today because that's just not how we do things. And if you are the type of person that doesn't want to give allowances because that's how it was back then, and you're acting like an idiot, don't do that. And there's a point in his discussion of No Power of the Dog where he does say that there are allusions to homosexuality, and he even gets pushback on it, saying that, wasn't that kind of the point of the movie? And then Sam Elliott, I think, is I don't agree with him, because I don't think that the movie necessarily falls because of what he was seeing as a critique. He was essentially saying that there are just so many technical things that you can feel are trying to get across a theme, that if you understand what that time was like and you understand what Western movies are like, that's going to come across as technically incorrect from just a technical standpoint. And for people to isolate 3 words here, 3 words from over there, put them together, they weren't even part of the same paragraph or the same thought, to make it seem like there's this huge misogynistic, homophobic thing going on is very, very frustrating. And it's been trending on all social media. I love Power of the Dog. I did a top 10 movies that you can find on this channel. Power of the Dog was on one of them. And I don't personally agree with Sam Elliott's conclusion that all of this stuff adds up to the movie not being any good. I really liked Power of the Dog. If someone else didn't like Power of the Dog, that's fine. If someone makes comments like Sam Elliott does in terms of something like Power of the Dog, leave them the fuck alone. Because all of this type of like clamoring on top of everyone because you can, I think it's honestly different these outlets like IndieWire, Hollywood Reporter, they keep coming out with all these articles about it. I just wanted to bring it up because it's very frustrating. It feels like they're kind of squeezing for content, and if you can outrage people, then that's very, very good whenever it comes to new content. I'm just very frustrated by all of that stuff, but wanted to bring it up. Give me your thoughts on it. What were your thoughts on that? What did you think of Power of the Dog? Do you think Sam Elliott actually did go too far in his comments? Honestly, that's a problem with podcasts too. You listen to the actual thing, you can tell that they're all chummy and they're just talking, they're hanging out, they're having a conversation. One person says, you know, fuck or something like that, and then all of a sudden you're on a expletive-filled tirade like it's been talked about in Hollywood Reporter. But let me know your thoughts on it. Thank you everyone very much that follows the channel. We've done some rebranding. This is still obviously 5 Minute Critic, especially when it comes to reviews, but the channel is now branded as Nathan Velasquez. So thank you very much for watching. Please be sure to share the videos, share the posts, and subscribe to Nathan Velasquez on YouTube for future updates on reviews and movie news.